Alaikum. So, inshallah, if any sisters would like to join us downstairs for the presentation, you're welcome to join us downstairs. If you have a better view upstairs, then I understand. And brothers, so I'm going to call out the names of people that I see talking, if I know the names. Brother Aason, Assalamu alaikum. Just saying salam. Okay, so Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Our book today is a very nice book that I have here, inshallah. You can come by and take a look at it. And this book is called Think for Yourself, The Ultimate Guide to Critical Thinking in an Age of Information Overload. So, in just a minute. Yeah. So this book is actually a children's, not a children, but like youth-oriented book. But it's actually very good because a lot of us adults, we also need that youth level of easy read books in order to be able to understand the concepts. It has a lot of nice stuff inside, and I think it's something that everybody should be well versed in, as we now have a lot of information overload. In fact, we have a lot of misinformation overload. So we need to be able to learn and train our minds, our thinking pattern, to be able to figure out when something does not look right or sound right. Now that we are entering the age of artificial intelligence, the amount of false information is going to become even harder to tell because of something called deep fake, where you can now create a video of somebody saying something which they never said. And it would be very, very difficult, except a computer probably, to be able to tell if this is a real or a fake. So, and I'm sure that the people who are working on it, they're going to try to make it so good that even computers can't figure it out. So, our Deen teaches us. So, does our Deen teach us critical thinking? Of course, in many, many places, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that don't you see? Go out and look. And look up. He says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us signs, and He has encouraged us and invited us to go out and look, because science, in reality, is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Science is a study of the creation of Allah, and that can never contradict the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we understand science correctly and if we understand the revelation correctly. Sometimes if there's a seeming contradiction, it may be that either we misunderstand the wahi, the revelation, or that we misunderstand the science that we are looking at, that there's something wrong there, but it cannot be in reality false because both of them are coming from the same source. So I picked up this book in the library with my kids. In fact, my kids picked it up, and I looked at it, I said, wow, this looks like a very nice book. Let me read it. And then when I read it, I liked it even more, so I chose it for this. So when you open this book, there's a table of contents that you can see on your screen. And it has 8 chapters. They're all very easily written. You could probably read this whole book in about 2 hours, if not less. So first it talks about what is critical thinking in the first place. Critical thinking, in essence, is if I tell you something, you don't just swallow it down and go die for it, but you say, well, okay, I heard you, but does it really make sense? Are the facts that I'm mentioning corresponding to the conclusions that I'm making? Okay, we'll talk about here something called the logical fallacy, where somebody presents something true, conspiracy theories, right? So they say, for example, that on such and such date, in such and such place, such event happened. And then on such and such date, in such and such place, another event happened. So they must be connected. Okay? And they will tell you that they are connected. It's all part of the same pattern. And he was like, okay, well, I understand that, but what is the evidence for the connection in between? And usually, conspiracy theories, what they are missing is the connection between events. Okay? They say, yes, this event and this event are related, but how do you know that they are connected? So, as an example, it mentions, for example, that in 1973, United States government passed a law called the Endangered Species Act. Since then, more than 1,600 animals have been protected by the law, including the bald eagle, grizzly bear, humpback whale, and many plants and insects. Deciding which animals should be added to or removed from the list is not very easy, because you have Congress has to make that decision, and there have been requests by people saying the gray wolf should now be removed from the endangered list. Okay, so it begins with saying that, okay, you are now Congress, and you have to decide if the gray wolf should be removed from the list or it should remain on the list. So what would you do? Here you have a group of people saying remove it, which means that you're now allowed to kill gray wolves. And the other group is saying, no, it should remain there, which means that no one is allowed to kill it. So even if this gray wolf is coming into your farm and it's attacking your cattle and scaring them and bothering them, you are not allowed to kill it, because that would be a violation of the law, and there are very, very hefty fines. So it says 100 years ago, gray wolves were hunted so intensely that there were hardly any left in the United States. After this law was passed, the gray wolf was added to the list. This meant it became illegal to hunt these. Since that time, wolf populations have recovered, and there are now more than 6,000 wolves in the lower 48 states. Now that the wolf population has grown, some people would like to remove the gray wolf from the endangered list. Others think it should stay. So now it basically gives you a very quick and easy guide to critical thinking, which is, number one is ask questions. Who wants to remove the gray wolf? Are the people who wanted to remove, are these people who are actually farmers that live in the area? Or are these hunters that want to kill gray wolves and get their hides to be able to show off, right? Who is it behind this whole thing? How many wolves in the United States? Is this a big number? So it's 6,000, sounds like a big number. But is this really a healthy number or not? You need to think a bit deeper, as opposed to just somebody says something and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds good. What happens to an animal once it's removed from the endangered species? You need to understand that before you change the law. So then, after you start asking questions and you get a whole lot of information, you need to now gather evidence. Every answer that somebody gives you, you cannot just take it at face value. You need to say, okay, what's the evidence for this, right? Now, if you look at, for example, with the situation in Gaza going on right now, right? You see these videos of Israeli army, IDF, going into the hospital and saying, hey, look, here is a Hamas base, right? Now, this thing, as you know, that it has been parodied so much on social media, because they're like, you see this calendar? This is a proof that there was Hamas over here. Like, what? How is a calendar proof that there was Hamas over here? Okay? Like, basically anything. You see this mic here? It must be their commander standing here and giving instructions to the soldiers. Okay? You see these guys sitting over here? They're all Hamas. Right? So basically anything and everything they could find, and people started like making fun of them. Like, this is the dumbest thing we've ever seen. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the funniest thing to me is that whenever they show you the evidence that they found, all the guns are perfectly lined up, right? All of them perfectly lined up. And then I'm thinking like, okay, if somebody is a Hamas fighter and they know that IDF is coming, are you going to leave your guns behind, or are you going to take them with you and fight with them? So, some critical thinking would actually allow a person to be able to see how all of this does not make sense at all. So then you start gathering evidence and you check the facts. Now, once you get the evidence, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. Because even the evidence that you found, that evidence could be biased, the way that it was gathered, who gathered it. So you need to check your facts really well before you make a big decision or even a small decision. You need to analyze the data. You need to look for logical fallacies, which we'll talk about in a second. And then, the process continues. So going back, so it shows you critical thinking in action. It shows you the basic process. Here are some things that they mentioned, that what are some ways where people, when they don't practice critical thinking, what do they do instead? So sometimes we all experience this, that somebody makes a decision based on stereotypes, okay? Meaning all Arabs are terrorists, or all Muslims are violent, or all so-and-so are so-and-so. These type of stereotypes are really, really dangerous because they can cause a lot of harm to a lot of innocent people. Now, people use it against us, but unfortunately, we are not innocent as well. We also make decisions based on stereotypes as well, and it does not help anyone. So, also, fear is a big motivator for people's decision making. That if they're afraid, and that's exactly what, for example, IDF is doing, the Israeli media machine, they want to always create fear, and they say, well, as long as these people exist, we will not be able to we will not be able to live peacefully. United States will not be at peace. The other countries will not, the European countries will not. So they will constantly create fear because they want to make you make a decision out of fear. Also, blind faith. Blind faith. So if my friend told me something, it must be true. Okay? We all watch certain media channels. And it's possible that we may come to like someone or some news channel so much that we start to have blind faith over whatever they say. And sometimes even if they make a mistake, we swallow it. Okay? I'll give you an example. Probably it doesn't apply to anybody here. Last week, I gave 3 khutbahs, and I mentioned a statistic, and I made a mistake in the calculation. So I said that so far, the Israeli number for the number of people killed on October 7th is 1,200. And so far, they have killed more than 14,000 in Gaza. And then I said it 3 times, and not a single person corrected me. I said, this means that they are killing 100 people for each one person. Okay? It's wrong. It's 10 people, more than 10 people per person, not 100. It didn't occur to me. I made a mistake, but I was like, how come not a single person corrected me? Like, people who were sitting close by, you should have said, like, no, 10. That thing was broadcast. I don't know how many people were watching it, where they were watching it, and I really embarrassed myself. It was an honest mistake from me. It just didn't compute right in my mind. But 1,000 people came, heard it from my mouth, and not a single person spoke up. You did? So you did not hear it. That means you were sleeping. You see, okay, so people heard it. So you're saying that you didn't think it was that important, but actually, you know what? That's exactly what somebody would use. And they would say, look, how they are misrepresenting facts. The fact is correct, but the conclusion is incorrect. Right? The assumption based on that fact is incorrect. Okay, we found a phone. So my expert tip to anyone and everyone, if you don't have your emergency information saved up in your phone, please do it right now. Because if you lose it, we can go quickly and we can find out who it is, and we can call their family member and we can say, hey, we found the phone over here. Is this yours? Okay, let's try that. It is an iPhone, but Siri is locked. I don't know what phone is this. Here you go. Anyways, so the point that you were saying, brother, is that yeah. So in the Jummah khutbah, you are not allowed to talk to anybody except the khatib. Okay? You can, so of course it should not be on something, frivolous, but if it's really an urgent thing, if there's a serious mistake that's being made, it is allowed. And in this case, I'm telling you that if I make some mistake like this, if I mess up an ayah, and you are, especially if you're sitting by, it's not like you're sitting in the back and yelling from the back, you can say 10, and it would help me correct. Okay, so anyways, there might be somebody here who is not a critical thinker at all, and they might actually go and they repeat to someone else that they have killed more than 100 people for each person. Of course, it is true in a different way, that they have killed more than 100 people per each person from their side over the long run. But in this case, we want to be accurate in what we say. Also, sometimes people, they basically have no knowledge and they will jump to conclusions without actually having facts. There are many examples of this. There's, for example, something called magic mud, where hundreds of years ago, people believed that frogs appear magically into mud. And that's how, until they realized that no, frogs actually go through different transformation of the body. Tadpoles, they are actually frogs, but it doesn't look like a frog at the time. Also, miracle water, there are many such things where they say, okay, just drink this water and all of the diseases of your body are going to go away. Also, people in the past used to believe that you could make gold. You could turn metal into gold. Okay? And if you turn metal into gold, then you're going to be very rich. Also, other examples of that. Now, let's look at some of the logical fallacies that this book talks about, right? So if anybody can think of, so let's say a sample statement. Somebody says, I think social media should be outlawed because it's easy to misuse. Okay? So when you think about this, there are logical fallacies that people have where, based on something true, the conclusion that they are drawing is very wrong. Okay? So one of them is called ad hominem. Anybody know what that means? What is that? You know what that means? Yes. So ad hominem, basically, instead of worrying about what the person is saying, you start to attack the person and saying, oh, you just don't like me. And you basically start to attack the person. Also, there is the straw man fallacy. The straw man fallacy, what is that? Yes. Basically, you exaggerate so much. So it represents or exaggerates the ideas that people are actually debating. So, for example, in this case, somebody says, I think social media should be outlawed because it's easy to misuse. So a person says, I can't believe you think perfectly nice people should be put in jail for using social media. Like, wait, I didn't go that far. I'm just saying that perhaps we should think about it. And you're like, what, you're saying all of us should be in jail? So when a person says that, it's like hard to respond to that because the person is not really thinking properly. Then there is the bandwagon argument. What's the bandwagon argument? If everybody is doing it, how could it be wrong? Right? So many people, they make decisions based on everybody else doing it. And it's a logical fallacy that just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. So just because a lot of people are doing it, and every prophet of Allah, when they came and they challenged their people said, that's what everybody else is doing. So just because everybody is doing it doesn't mean that it is right. Also, there is the slippery slope argument. The slippery slope is that this type of argument assumes that if one thing is allowed to happen, it will automatically cause a chain reaction. So a person says, no way, if we outlaw social media, then pretty soon real life conversations will become illegal too. And you're like, okay, you're taking a huge jump very fast. Then nobody's saying that. Also, the red herring, very good one, often used. Red herring. Anybody knows? Red herring is basically you're discussing an issue about social media and somebody throws in something completely different in order to make people look away and not where they are actually looking. So for example, if somebody says, if you really cared about being healthy, you would exercise. You're like, wait, we're talking about social media. Where did exercise come from? Then there is the false dilemma, which is the type of argument wrongly assumes that there are only two possible conclusions. It's only A or B, and there's nothing in between, and there's nothing else. So this is sometimes called the black or white thinking. So basically a person says, well, we either outlaw social media and stay healthy, or we don't outlaw it and we turn into mindless blobs. Okay? So again, logical fallacy. Also, there's the appeal to emotion. Appeal to emotion, again, a very, very commonly used one, where when you're discussing a matter with someone, instead of discussing the facts, debating the facts, analyzing the facts, a person goes for emotional appeal. Okay? So an example of this would be, a person says, hey, that's mean. Think of how hard it will be for people to connect with relatives and friends who live far away. That's something that hits everybody, right? That I want to be able to communicate with my relatives. So the argument was not really about ending communication, but it's talking about the negative side effect of social media, which is possible for some. But this person says, hey, you know what? No way. This will prevent people from being able to connect with their relatives and friends. And then lastly is the questionable cause, which is a person says that they outlawed social media and bullying increased. Okay? So this person made a connection that the cause of the increase of bullying was the outlawing of social media. But where is the evidence for that? Okay, and here, whenever Israelis, they say, look, we are attacking Gaza because there's Hamas over there. So you're like, okay, so what other areas are you attacking? And of course, they don't want to talk about that, but of course, they are doing a lot of bad stuff in the West Bank, where there's no Hamas. And then, I was watching something that they were saying that, look, they are saying that we are attacking Hamas infrastructure. Okay? Now, Hamas is the government of Gaza, right? So that means that they consider everything, so basically government is covering everything. So as a result, every single structure is considered Hamas infrastructure, according to them, okay? But they will present it like, we attacked Hamas infrastructure. So this is some very important stuff that unfortunately a lot of people miss easily. The book also mentions some very nice stories about people who did some critical thinking and actually came up with some idea or some changed the way people think. One of them was a man by the name of Richard Tureri, and he was, I believe he lived somewhere in Africa where there are a lot of lions. And a lot of people were very bothered by the lions attacking their cattle. So Richard noticed that whenever he went out at nighttime and he had a flashlight in his hand, the lions did not come near. So he's like, okay, light, flashlight, and lions staying away. So let me see if I could put some more lights on. And through this breakthrough, they were able to basically come up with an idea where they actually put certain type of lights in a certain area, which basically kind of keeps the lions away at nighttime, and they're able to protect their animals a bit more. Also, Melissa Shang, she was a person who had a disability and she was in a wheelchair. So she said that growing up, she always noticed that all the dolls were never looking like her. So she could not relate with them because her life experience is completely different from all the dolls that have perfectly fine bodies. So she wrote a letter to the company and told them that, hey, what can I play with? I don't have anything that I can relate with. What I can do, no doll can do. Like in the meaning, I can't play with them like the way I live my life. And that actually made them think and open up research studies on that matter. And they basically started to then make toys for kids with disabilities where they can feel relatable as well. Okay. Also, Dr. Jane Goodall, she is a chimpanzee researcher, and she spent 30 years in a jungle living with chimpanzees. And she actually is one of the leading researchers, and she learned a lot about chimpanzees with regards to their behavior, their communication, their emotions, their usage of tools, and all of those things that actually allowed us to understand a lot more about ourselves in the sense that, okay, where is, history of humanity? I'm not saying we're coming from chimps, but I'm saying that understand with regards to understanding of tools, who started using tools first, okay, and other things related to that. Also, they talk about a group of students from Rutland High School where they had a social media internally, and what started to happen is that people started to use that platform to say some very mean things to people on that platform outside of school. So these people, they came together and they basically studied the matter, and they came up with some solutions to address that problem, and they were able to reduce a lot of that bad stuff. Also, they talk about Emma Gonzalez, which is a girl who went to a school where there was a high school shooting. And, normally kids go to high school and they have memories of having fun and playing and all that type of stuff. But she saw 17 of her class mates get killed in front of her eyes, basically. So she started to, think, okay, like we need to do something bigger, and she became a gun control advocate, and she was able to actually do a lot of volunteering and raise a movement with regards to changing some of the laws related to that. So in the end, there is a nice summary of the pattern that we need to think, but I would definitely encourage people to consider. I got this book from Cedar Park Library, by the way, and I will return it in a day or two. So the big idea that they give, the summary of in the end, is ask questions. If you want to be a critical thinker, ask. If somebody presents a case, ask questions. Look, tell me more. Where are you getting this from? Gather evidence. After you gather evidence, that is itself not enough, but rather you need to evaluate the evidence. It talks about if someone comes and tells you, hey, I saw something bad happen outside. So you ask them, well, did you see it happen or did somebody tell you? If they saw it happen, then that's called a first-hand witness, primary witness. And if they did not see it themselves, they heard it from a friend of them telling them. Now, this is a secondary witness, meaning this person did not see it. So we all know that when information changes hands or ears, it changes a little bit. So how many people passed the story down before it actually reached you? So before you make a decision, evaluate the strength of the evidence. Remember, we have the science of hadith. And the science of hadith is essentially evaluation of the evidence. Who said what, and who is that person? Where did this person live? Who were his teachers? Who did this person meet? And is it possible for him to meet the person that he's claiming to be reporting it from? So, evaluation of evidence. Then, get curious. So, after you got a whole lot of evidence, you evaluated the evidence, consider different conclusions and other points of views as well, right? A person might be telling you, hey, we should ban kids from coming to the masjid. Actually, this is a very good example. People do say that we should ban kids from coming to the masjid because they make too much noise. So after you gathered evidence, after you look at the number of kids and everything, are there any other options that could be explored where the kids can come to the masjid, but also there could be a bit more quiet time in the masjid as well? Then you draw a conclusion, but that is based on reason and evidence. And then that doesn't stop there. Critical thinking continues. And you can still discuss and debate with other people that have different views and say, okay, you know what? I have this conclusion, but what do you think? And it talks about, for example, the issue of refugees. Okay? People who are coming to your country, whatever country it is, in search for a better life, should they be allowed or should they not be allowed? What do you think? Allowed? We're all immigrants, right? Now, a very good point they make is that go and ask this question to someone who sees their country changing in front of them. And they are seeing these guys coming over and building houses and getting rich, and this guy is struggling to find a job. Okay? If someone comes and tells them, hey, we need to ban these guys because they are taking your jobs, it is so easy for this person to fall into that. Right? And that happens all the time. And this is happening with regards to, for example, Palestine, right? After the Nakba, after so many people are forced to leave, where do they go? They go into the neighboring countries. Now, there's a movie on Netflix. It was called A World Not Ours. Thank you for recommending that. And this movie, this documentary, is about life in one of these refugee camps called Ain al-Hilwa in, I believe it's in Lebanon. These people, they are not allowed to step outside the camp. They're not allowed to go and get a job outside. The only source of survival for them is the aid which is distributed inside the camp. Now, if you have these people, they don't have good schools. They don't have schools. Nobody plans schools in a refugee camp. You basically, parents have to come together and say, okay, we need to do something. They don't have anything. They're just living there temporarily. And that temporary situation, which was supposed to be maybe 6 months, a year, has now turned to 75 years. Okay? And this is what's happening all around. So they are literally living in very, very basic, rudimentary buildings. And it shows different characters that some of them, his life is his chickens. That's what he keeps himself busy with. That's all they can do. And now this is just one little camp. You have them in Jordan. You have these camps, all across in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Turkey, all of these different places, all the war-torn refugees that come there, they are not allowed to work. Okay, we're getting a call on this phone. Rahma is calling. Okay, I think I know who this is. So now you say, okay, well, now the people of that country, they say, look, if we let these refugees out of these camps, they're going to come and take the jobs that we ourselves don't have. The few are going to be taken. So what are we going to do? So it's a very sad thing that one of these guys from this documentary, he manages to basically pay a coyote to get them smuggled out to, what country was it that they went to? Greece. They went to Greece, and for 1 year, the guy lived on the streets because he's undocumented. He managed to get in, but he's living on the streets. Unfortunately, there are many countries where these refugees have made it there, but because they're not legally allowed to work, they have to, in order to survive, they have to resort to illegal stuff. Drugs, prostitution, blackmail, smuggling, black market type of stuff. And basically, that feeds that narrative that refugees are bad. Okay? So it's a really, really bad situation, but of course a person really needs to think deeply before reaching conclusions and before condemning a group of people entirely or accepting everything as is. Now, there are lots of issues about that. And then lastly, it says, keep growing. Well, I'll just come back to a second. Yeah. But they came as refugees, but they were given full rights. Nobody said, hey, you're not going to be able to work here or buy land or anything like that. They basically did it a different way. They played the game a different game. So at the end, even after you have reached your own conclusion on a matter, it is not the end of your critical thinking, because you may be believing something for 50 years of your life, which you researched a long time ago, but you may come across someone who may convince you about something else. So Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he used to say that I believe I'm right with a small possibility that I could be wrong. And I believe that my opponent, the one I disagree with, is wrong with a small possibility that he could be right. So number one, it allows us to be cordial with each other. That, okay, you know what? I believe I'm right. I believe you're incorrect. But there is a margin of error there, so there's no need for us to mess up our relationship or be mean to each other over this. And number two is that it keeps you open to thinking and looking for new ideas, new evidence that may actually help you change. So it's a very simple, easy to read book with a lot of pictures, a lot of, good big words, so it's very easy to read. So I would highly recommend people to not just get the book, read the book, but also implement the book, inshallah. Any questions or comments or suggestions? Yes, brother. Jazakallah khair. And when there is, okay, so I think you should say this on the mic. It was a mini lecture itself, so you need to say this on the mic. Repeat your comment.
Yes, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Jawad, for a beautiful session that the Muslim community lacks and needs to learn, because that session we just learned how to become critical thinker, how to learn about the fallacies that he described in his slides, because this is what we see in all our social media platform. You'll see the good, the bad, the ugly. Everyone is expressing his opinion on the cause of the war of Palestine. They make black look white and white look black, and they think there is only white and black, but actually there is a lot of several levels of gray colors. So learning that critical thinking and identifying and evaluating all these different messages in social media is very critical for you to formulate your responses to make it more sound and more logical and more colorful instead of just a black and white. So Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Jawad. I loved that session. I enjoyed it. I learned quite a bit. Barakallah feek.
So I would add to that that after we understand this, what we need to figure out is how can we get the American public to become critical thinkers? How can we point out the logical fallacies in the Israeli narrative, right? And one thing that came to my mind, which we just talked about before, is when, the first interview of, what's his name, Bassem Youssef, right, with Piers Morgan, where he said, okay, let's imagine a world where there is no Hamas, okay? Let's imagine a world there's no Hamas. Let's give it a name. It's called West Bank. Israel is still killing people over there. If you're using the argument that we're attacking Gaza because of Hamas, why are you doing what you're doing there? And you know what we mentioned today in the khutbah, that even in the West Bank, rain does not belong to those people. It belongs to Israel. It is the property of Israel. So they are not allowed to collect rainwater. And I saw a documentary recently where they have these small little areas where Muslims are living, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, non-Israelis basically. And they have put this ring around them, but it's not just around them. They even put a fence on top. So they can't actually get out into the open sky. There's a fence on top in certain areas because literally you're talking about Gaza being a prison. Even those areas are becoming prisons. And they throw garbage on top. So those guys, they can go on top and they throw garbage and they dump their, disgusting stuff. Basically, the idea is get out of here. We want this land. Jazakallah khair. Any sister? Yes. Can I throw you a mic up? If you could at least stand up and speak loud so we can hear well. Fallacies? To what extent is the obligation of an individual? I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So, yeah. How much critical thinking does a person have to do? Yeah. So I'll make 2 points about that. Number one is that there's a hadith the Prophet ﷺ said about if someone reaches the age of 60. Anybody know this hadith? If a person reaches the age of 60, they have no excuse in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning they had an entire life to realize the truth. And if they still did not, put 2 and 2 together, then there is no excuse for them in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one point. Second thing is with regards to teenagers, of course we need to encourage them, but often we have to figure out creative ways to teach our kids. And I remember from one of my classes, our teacher taught us something that I remember, and it's so valuable and something all of us can put in practice. Our teacher, it was a class on sociology. And the professor said that today I want to take all of your opinion on a matter. I said, okay. So the teacher said that there is a tribe that lives in the North American region. It is called the Aason tribe, ASU. And this tribe, it lives in the North American region. And this tribe has a problem. Their problem is that they raise an animal which is, the size of a bull, generally speaking, that they live with. And this animal is considered to be a sign of prestige among them. And when their kids turn 16 years old, they often get them this animal called a rack. It's called a rack. And they give it to them as a gift. However, every year, thousands of the members of this tribe are killed because of these racks going out of control and running people over. So what do you think that this tribe should do with regards to these animals that they raise and they consider a sign of prestige? What do you think? Anybody? Huh? Put them under control, okay. Keep them away? In their own habitat, okay. All right. Yes. Find prestige in something else, okay. So we all said the same stuff, right? And then at the end of it, our professor said, well, this Aason tribe is actually USA. And it lives in the North American region. And this animal called rack is actually a car. So how many of us are now willing to put our cars away and get back to walking, right? So it was a really creative way for her to make us think about something where we would not, if I told you, shouldn't we get rid of cars or put them away or something like that, we would say, no, we depend on them. And indeed, cars are prestige for people, and people give gifts to their kids and whatnot, but subhanAllah, that's one way, yeah. Yeah, it's jumping to conclusions, right? So the point I was making is that with regards to teenagers, and even with regards to our fellow Americans, we need to actually use this technique to basically make them think of this problem in a way where they don't become defensive, but actually think independently. Once they reach a conclusion on that, then tell them, well, this is what exactly is happening over there. Okay? So inshallah, yes. If anybody needs to go, by the way, you're free to go, but you're welcome to stay, yes.
So my question is...
If you like.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question regarding this is, then in Islam, how much taqleed is important versus critical thinking in everything? Like, for example, I see like in America, when the kids go to school, the most important thing they are teaching is question everything. And sometimes the kids' minds are not broadened enough to understand the culture. And they say, you don't see Allah, so how do you believe in Allah? And they think from their mind that there is nothing, that is, if I do wrong, I'm not getting punished, so that means there is no Allah. So, and they think critically, but they come to the wrong conclusion. And in this case, how important is taqleed versus, critical thinking?
So I think that when it comes to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not tell us in the Quran to just believe. But He tells us that there are signs around you. And those signs are well observed and agreed upon. So it's often parents can get confused when the kid comes home and says something like that. It's usually a sign that the parents themselves have never done critical thinking. And they are basically, we talked about, there was a page which is blind faith, right? Right there, blind faith is a dangerous thing because you can lead a person down a rabbit hole based on blind faith. So Islam does not encourage us blind faith except after we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After that, we are told that now that you believe in Allah and you have seen the signs, now the command of Allah, you do sami'na wa ata'na. You listen and we listen and we obey. We don't question the command if we can prove it is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, what is the balance between that? I would say that whenever we do proper critical thinking, we would reach the truth. Because the truth is what we are preaching, right? So it's not like we are trying to shut people's brains down in order to convince them of this false religion. So I would say that the parents need to then learn a bit more. And also, we had, for example, earlier this year, Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik, who specializes in doubts which are placed in the minds of Muslim students so that you can actually understand them. And a simple answer is enough that, okay, if you say that just because we can't see Allah, does it mean you're saying that Allah does not exist? Let's look at what other things we believe in that we cannot see as well. And there are lots and lots of things like simple as love, we cannot see, we cannot measure, we cannot feel, but we can feel it, but we cannot measure it. We cannot see it. We cannot hear it, but it's there. So, maybe that would be the next level of critical thinking, which is, how do you take down arguments? And actually, it has a little bit about debates as well. How do you debate something? So, Islam encourages us to be a continuous learner. And Islam encourages especially scholars to actually be critical thinkers. And most of our standout scholars are the critical thinking scholars, meaning they respect the tradition, but they don't accept anything and everything as is except the word of Allah and His Messenger. So I think that we don't really have a problem with that because we are not trying to hide something which is not true. Wallahu alam. Yes. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Don't be fooled by how little. Fooled. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So the brother mentioned a quote of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah that follow the way of the truth and don't be worried about how few travelers there are. And don't beware of the path of batil, of falsehood, and don't be fooled or deceived or impressed by how many people are on that path. So follow the truth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all the tawfiq to do so. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.